"Cash only," the woman at the storage office said, tapping the faded counter. Glenn fished out 2 wrinkled 20s and a crumpled 5, his last bills, and slid them over with a tired nod. Behind him, a battered duffel slumped at his feet, spilling drafts, a cracked phone charger, and a half-eaten protein bar onto the linoleum. He barely glanced at the notice to vacate crammed into the folder under his arm. He'd read it enough times to taste the bitterness in his mouth. "Unit 11's all yours, Mr. Barrett," the woman said, half sympathetic, half bored. "For the month." The month? Glenn rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaustion pooling behind his eyes. He'd need coffee soon, but coffee in Newport crept up close to $3 now. "You sure it'll be a month?" "Depends, our rates change on the 1st. No guarantees." Sometimes he wondered what was worse, losing by inches or losing all at once. In the last 60 days, he dropped 3 contracts, watched late rent notices pile up on his inbox, and trudged through enough cold calls and lowball offers to make him want to chuck his degree in the Yaquina River. He'd specialized in architectural restoration. Nobody wanted to pay for restoration. Not coastal towns creaking under the weight of old fishing dreams and new Airbnb condos. He nodded, zipped up his parka, and set out for the coast shack he'd driven 16 hours to see. The wind carved salt into his cheeks. Gulls dipped and whined above Yaquina Bay, the fog pressing so low he could just make out the skeletal frame of the old smokestack over the trees. He walked until his boots hit the crunchy gravel driveway. There stood the mill, more hulk than home, cowering between 2 thickets of fir, every inch battered by salt and storm. The keys had come by courier, hand-delivered in a battered manila envelope scrawled for Glenn. "Grandpa would want this." Inside, a typed letter and 1 iron skeleton key, cold and heavy. The letter was blunt. His grandfather's old business partner, Franklin Marsh, had bought Glenn out of the family assets fair and square. Only for his trouble, Glenn now possessed the man's share. A worthless, caved-in sawmill, the final remains of Barrett timber. The entire Barrett side had gathered on a glitchy Zoom call weeks earlier, laughing about the inheritance. A literal dead doghouse worth almost nothing, and the land hardly more than a postage stamp, Franklin insisted, his voice sticky with forced pity. But tucked behind that letter, strange, almost stuck to the envelope, was a small envelope marked in his grandfather's precise script, "Forgive yourself enough to try." Inside, a single battered key and a slip of paper with the words, "Samson's place, look under old Bones' bed." He read it 3 times in the rented Corolla, breath knocking fast in his chest. Bones had been his grandfather's dog-gone since Glenn was 11. If you've ever been handed a future that feels like a punchline and everyone's grinning except you, keep listening. This story isn't about ghosts, but about the kind of theft that walks upright, smiling, and about what you discover when you dig where nobody else bothers. The path back around the shack twisted through knee-high grass slick with dew. Glenn's boots soaked through in seconds. Salt hung in the air, making his lips rough. The doghouse lay sprawled behind a blackberry tangle, just as he half remembered from childhood. Shingled roof split by moss, faded trim still pale blue under the grime. He crouched, pushing aside a wheelbarrow wheel and a rusted bucket. His hands shook as he ran them along the baseboard, feeling for loose slats or a catch. The boards under the doghouse rattled, 1, 2, the third felt spongy, too light. Glenn pried it up. Underneath, dark, dry cavity, his flashlight beam caught on a steel box slick with dust. His heart hammered, half in hope, half in dread. "Don't get clever now," he muttered, easing the box toward him. "Let it be something." He fumbled with the small key. It fitted perfectly and the box popped open, a hiss of stale air rushing out. Inside, a sheaf of blueprints, brown with age but trimmed in his grandfather's distinctive red pencil marks, a small flat envelope stamped "Patent Pending, Do Not File, Confidential," and folded underneath a handwritten deed on the old type of county stationery, legalese marching in uneven lines. The blueprints showed detailed diagrams of compact wind turbine prototypes, nothing like the mass-market junk that flooded the internet, but unique, half-mechanical, half-artisan. Below, patent forms, complete with signatures, his grandfather's and Franklin Marsh's both, the words to be filed jointly. Hold until full confirmation of land survey. Glenn's thumb snagged on the edge of the deed. He unfolded it, staring at the faded signatures, Barrett, Garrison, Marsh, Franklin. The document outlined not the 1 acre Franklin claimed, but over 10 times the acreage, bordering the North River and including generous resource rights. He blinked, realizing what Franklin had done, filed a narrow claim for Glenn's inheritance, and siphoned off the rest through forged family sales, pocketing land and royalties. Swallowing hard, Glenn bundled up the blueprints and slides. This called for a verification expert. Maybe, just maybe, everything Marsh had told him had been a lie. He stood, knees grazing cold dirt. Through the open window of the shack, he could already hear the echo of Franklin Marsh's chuckle from that Zoom call, a smirk built into every syllable. "Ain't a square yard of that place worth fighting over, Glenn. Take the weekend vacation if you want, but after that, the company's moving ahead." But there was the first hook. His grandfather hadn't bought into Franklin's story. Neither would he. Glenn jammed the blueprints under his arm, locked the box, and set out down the rutted driveway. Fog clung thick as he reached the road. Rain spat sideways, soaking his collar. The Corolla vibrated as he wrestled the box into the backseat. As he turned the ignition, a single crow cawed and took flight from the mossy roof. The sense that nothing would be quite so simple again crept in. He punched in the only number he trusted, Charlie Nguyen, forensic accountant and all-around back-channel fixer, then realized Charlie was 3 time zones ahead. Still, he texted. Then, driving, his headlights carved a yellow tunnel through the rising mist. Driving west, the scent of sage gave way to brine. Glenn's gut twisted. The same feeling he'd had when 4 years ago he'd pulled into Portland for a sure-thing job in restoration, only to be let go for budget cuts after a month. He'd always landed feet down if never quite running. But now, down to his last check, booted by the world and holding blueprints no one else believed mattered. The drive cut across empty fields, puddled logging roads, and a slow drop in confidence with every new pothole. His chest ached from tension, hands white-knuckled around the steering wheel. At a red light, he glanced in the rear view, half expecting Franklin's pale Lexus to slide up behind him. Instead, it was just him. Glenn Barrett, restoration dropout, son of former big men, broke but not yet beat. Tonight, the bay felt like the whole world had emptied just for him to walk through ash. A sign loomed, Laurel and Twist, legal advisor. Bingo. He'd heard through the grapevine that the partner Matty Twist had a particular vendetta with Franklin. The place looked closed. The porch light glared at him anyway. He grabbed the blueprints, stuffed them under his coat, and rapped sharply on the glass. Matty herself opened the door, eyes bleary but alert. "Got business or trouble, kid?" Glenn held out the patent envelope. "Both, can I come in?" She let him slip past into the small office, still murmuring with the clack of a heater. Glenn's shoes left muddy smears on the checkered tile. He spread the blueprints on the battered conference table. "Wind turbines, never filed, never released, but there's legal documents here, 10 acres, not 1. She squinted, tapping a pencil. "Where'd you find all this?" "In an old doghouse, my grandfather's place." Matty grinned despite herself. "You win points for originality. Who's the villain?" "Franklin Marsh," he swore. "I only had 1 acre, gave me a sob story about burnt leases, the rest lost to the state. But this," he jabbed at the signature, "everything on that call was a lie." "Let's see about the scale of that lie," Matty said. She flipped open her laptop, typing furiously. A low hum filled the room as she scanned documents, comparing scans of the deed and patent envelope. Rain battered the windows, hard and wild. Glenn shivered. "Their lease is up for renewal in 45 days, Matty announced, sharp. "If Marsh signs, all your land rights are gone. Undoing it afterward, legal nightmare." Glenn choked a dry laugh. "Figures." He said the oil and mining reps just wanted to poke around, nothing binding, plays it like he's doing me a favor. "Your grandfather was no fool," Matty murmured. "He left countersigned assets. Franklin's forged signatures here, look." she pointed, tracing the almost invisible variance in script. A pulse of fear rolled through Glenn's gut. How long do we have? She looked grim. Not enough. If Marsh files, your options shrink to zero, so move. Find a forensic, freeze his motions, and pray the courts move quickly. If you can prove that money was siphoned off for years, you can bring a civil suit and freeze everything, she continued. But you need more. You have to link up the cash flow, or the judge won't touch Marsh's other assets. Glenn stared at the wall. Do you know anyone who could do that? She eyed him, then said softly, Charlie's the best in 3 states. You sure you want to go after family? He hesitated only a second. Franklin sold off my future. If I'd rolled over, he'd have gotten away with it. My grandfather trusted me for a reason. He did. Maddie met his gaze. And right now, you might be the only one standing between Marsh and the rest of your family's birthright. A crack of thunder shook the glass. Glenn's resolve hardened. You'll help. She nodded once. I'll help, but from here on out, you're running on adrenaline. He exhaled, fists unclenching at last. Deal. If Glenn thought for a second that Franklin Marsh didn't know he was on to him, that delusion shattered in the days that followed. The morning after, Glenn spotted the familiar Lexus idling near the shack, Franklin's silhouette visible behind streaked glass. When Glenn stepped outside, their gazes met, Franklin's lips curling in a grim line. Big fan of nostalgia, are you? Franklin called through a sliver of rolled-down window. Only if it's real. Glenn kept his voice measured. Franklin drummed his fingers over the steering wheel. I'd recommend you take up fishing, not treasure hunting. This land's tapped out. Don't waste your time or mine. What if it's not? Glenn asked, stubborn. You never did know when to quit. The window hissed back up and the Lexus pulled away. Panic nipped at Glenn's heels. He jogged inside, scanning the walls for a phone. His cell near dead, he ghost-dialed Charlie from his laptop. Charlie's voice came through, crackly but awake. Barrett, didn't expect to hear from you after that mess in Portland. You'll want to see what I found at the coast. Can you make it up here? Charlie grunted, not for pleasure but for pay, sure. What's the scoop? Trust fund skimming. 10 acres stolen, blueprints, patent forms, fake sales. I need the cash trail. Give me 48, a proper Wi-Fi password, and coffee. I'll see what I can do. He paused, then added in a gravelly drawl, don't leave town, and stay away from anyone offering you deals in the meantime. Glenn smiled despite the pressure clamping his chest. If I'm not alive in 48, you can have my 50-year-old protein bars. Can't be worse than conference hotel breakfast. Charlie ended the call. 2 hours later, just as Glenn risked cracking a can of watery beans, his email pinged. Marsh & Company RE, lease extension proposal. Franklin's offer bold as brass, giving Glenn a courtesy 5 days to respond before Franklin would assert guardianship rights on the property and all associated residuals, including mineral, timber, and alternative energy claims. The deadline stared back at him, 45 days, just as Maddie warned. Glenn stared at the email until the text blurred. He replied with a non-committal, I'll review and get advice. Then he called Maddie. Read me the fine print, she said briskly. He did, and she swore. He's going to rush the signatures, get you out on a technicality. If you don't act, you lose it all. A moment of silence on the line. Then Maddie, voice low, you're in a race now, him versus you. The countdown had begun. The next 3 days blurred into a frantic relay of calls, caffeine, and the storm battering the shack's leaking roof. Charlie arrived with 2 battered suitcases, 3 laptops, and an attitude. He set up on the old kitchen table, spinning screens through records, cash flows, patent logs, and notary stamps. You didn't tell me he funneled $3 million through dummy companies, Charlie remarked, scrolling with one hand, coffee in the other. Every single dime laundered out right under the nose of the county clerk. Glenn gaped. $3 million. Try more, royalty checks off the books, mineral leases sold to Shell LLCs. Your worthless junkyard S been his personal ATM for 20 years. Glenn's throat dried out. If we can prove it. We can. Took me 4 hours to trace the Shell games. Charlie's eyes narrowed. But you need a judge with guts, and you need to make this loud before Franklin ties up the lease and dumps everything in the Caymans. Civil suit. Best route, you should prep it tonight. Files, deeds, patent log, label everything. I'll be your expert witness. Charlie's voice grew gentle for a beat. This is going to get ugly. Glenn felt the tang of copper at the back of his throat. I've said ugly before, Charlie. Never had much luck running from it. Good, Charlie said. You'll need running at it. That night after dark, a truck idled at the fence. Glenn caught the flashlight beam through the bay window and the silhouette, broad and precise, of Franklin himself. He walked out, careful-footed on the wet porch boards. Franklin stood at the line, hands in his pockets. Land's dangerous here after dark. Glenn grinned, fierce. Only trouble I ever saw came with a handshake and a deal. Franklin's eyes hardened, voice dropping to a hiss. You don't want to go down this road, Glenn. We can work something out. 40,000 today. Sign it all over, no fuss. I'd rather see it rot, Glenn shot back. Grandpa didn't raise a fool. Franklin stepped in close, voice gone cold. You're out of money, time, and friends. Be smart, sell out. I know about the Shell companies, all 3 million. Franklin's face for a split second went slack. Glenn pressed, I've got enough to burn you down. Every paper, every wire transfer. Tick-tock, Franklin. Franklin's fist curled. The air snapped, charged. You can't prove a thing, Franklin spat. Not in court. Try me, Glenn replied. We'll see whose paper holds. Franklin stormed off, gravel spitting under his shoes. For the first time, Glenn felt like he had leverage. It wasn't just family at stake. It was principle, stubborn, battered principle, all he had left that couldn't be hawked for scrap. He watched Franklin vanish down the drive, the night closing in. Tomorrow everything would change. In a back booth at the Sundown Diner the next day, Glenn and Charlie met Maddie again over bitter coffee. Maddie unspooled her plan. Hearing S set for 2 weeks from Monday. We file the injunction today, freeze Franklin's ability to sign anything, move money, or sell leases. Glenn swallowed, staring down at the swirling patterns in his mug. What are the odds? Charlie grinned, teeth flashing. If the judge has eyes, 90%. Maddie added, we have to hit fast. Franklin's lawyers will pull every cheap trick, delay, rewrite signatures, anything to keep control. Glenn jabbed a pen into his palm, thinking, and if we lose? Maddie shook her head. If we lose, you lose everything. If we win, Marsh walks out of court with a bag of memories and no place to sleep. Charlie added, but you need to make this about more than patents and property. Make it about the lie. Maddie said, truth's harder to bury than land. Glenn looked up, then we bury him with truth. They burned the long hours assembling folders, witness lists, and affidavits. Every document triple-copied, every blueprint scanned. Glenn wrote out his statement by hand, nerves sharpening each word. Late, as rain battered the windows again, he called his mother. She answered after the 3rd ring. Glenny. Hey, Mom, I found something. Granddad wasn't half the fool people said. Tears pierced the silence. I always knew he trusted you. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish what he started. She exhaled, be careful, hun. Marsh plays dirty. Don't I know it, Glenn whispered. He hung up, heart thudding but alive. Morning came, court loomed, stucco and glass aglow in blue dawn. A security line snaked inside. Glenn squared his shoulders, pressed his palm to the cool file folder, and mounted the courthouse steps. Inside, Franklin already waited, silk tie, cordial smile, eyes colder than the Willamette in January. His lawyers clustered, papers stacked high. Glenn faced them, Maddie and Charlie flanking. His tie felt askew, hands sticky with sweat. The courtroom quieted as Judge Ramsey entered, her presence cutting through the murmurs. The suit began. Franklin's lawyer rose first. Mr. Marsh contests all allegations. The property in question has been signed and allotted according to law. Maddie's turn. If it please the court, we request this exhibit be entered deed of trust, signed by both parties, granting my client proprietary rights over 10 acres, not one. Note the signature matches except for the following. She circled the faked entry. Franklin flicked his wrist, feigning boredom. Charlie, called as witness, laid out the cash flow. This account, 63 wire transfers, totaling $3,112,000, routed through Marsh's companies, never entered record books. Every penny was family funds. Franklin's voice, brittle, cut through. Baseless, anyone can make a spreadsheet. Judge Ramsey fixed him with a glare. We will decide what's baseless. Glenn stepped forward, script clutched. Permission to address. Granted, the judge said. He read, voice level. I didn't come here for money. I came to find out why a man I trusted turned my future into a con. This land wasn't for sale. Neither were the blueprints in that box. I've got what you need, Judge, the original patent draft, the unbroken chain of custody, the banking trail. Marsh lied over and over because he thought no one would look. Franklin's lawyer objected, but the judge quieted him. A hush. Glenn pulled the patent envelope from his stack. This was left to me for a reason. I ask the court to consider its contents. The judge summoned the exhibits. Each document passed down the bench, each forged signature shadowed by Maddie's careful notes. The blueprints unfolded, the account ledgers tallied. Franklin watched, sweat crawling along his jawbone. Then the final blow. Charlie finished, stone calm. There are two kinds of thieves, the ones who take what isn't theirs and the ones who try to bury the evidence. Marsh did both. Maddie's summation was cool fire. We ask for the total seizure of assets, the full property return, and a judgment against Mr. Marsh for fraudulent theft of trust funds. Franklin's face blanched, his composure splintering. He jerked forward, voice wobbly. You want my house? Take it. You want the company? Take it. But I made Barrett Timber what it is. So did my grandfather, Glenn called, voice shaking but steady. Silence, a kernel of vindication flickered in Glenn's chest. The judge's ruling came with crisp authority. All property is seized from Mr. Marsh pending restitution. All assets, accounts, and privileges are frozen. Mr. Barrett is awarded full ownership of the land and all patents. Any attempt at liquidation will be met with criminal referral. The courtroom buzzed, whispers crackling like sparklers. Franklin sputtered, this family's nothing without my work. Maddie's voice snapped, maybe it's better that way. Security escorted Franklin from the room, his phone already confiscated. Outside, reporters were gathering, eyes sparkling with hunger for a scandal. Charlie grinned at Glenn over the crowd. Not bad for a week's work, he drawled, ready to rebuild Barrett. Glenn could only nod, lips parting in a dazed half-smile. Ready as I'll ever be. In the weeks that followed, the headlines told the story in black and white. Local scion loses everything, court uncovers millions stolen from family trust. Franklin Marsh lost his house, his business, and any stake in the Barrett name. Civil court appointed a conservator over his remaining assets. Glenn spent days fielding calls from relatives, most sheepish, asking about the reunion he'd promised if he pulled off the impossible. Work on the old mill began at last. Glenn picked up a crowbar, boots sunk deep in mud, and started in on rot and beams, piecing back the bones of the house that had been nearly stolen beneath him. He rebuilt not just for himself, but for every doubter who'd told him never to bother fighting the tide. The first family gathering was small but real. Cousins, nieces, distant aunts all bearing pie, stories, children in tow. remembrances of the man whose blueprints had survived storms and thieves alike. Months passed. The coast storms slowly eased, the shack's roof got patched, then braced, then rebuilt. Glenn's hands bore new calluses, fresh scars. Each year more relatives made the pilgrimage. The old doghouse stayed just where he'd found it, now brushed off, filled with ferns and new life. For Glenn, the lesson was simple. Sometimes the greatest defenses are built not with walls, but with the courage to peel back each layer of rot and see what might survive beneath. So if you ever find yourself staring down a future that looks like nothing but fractured boards and wind-battered walls, think of a man with nothing left but a key to a doghouse, the will to dig, and the kind of stubborn hope that refuses to die. And know, as thunder rumbles out beyond the bluffs, that sometimes what you hold on to, by sheer grit, is more lasting than everything taken from you. The storms will come again. But this time, Glenn Barrett would be ready, standing just where he was meant to stand, door open, laughter echoing through the bones of home. The wind off the coast was mild for May, the brine gentler now, the clouds lifting blue above cedar and fir. Glenn stood on the mill's new threshold, thumbs hooked in patched jeans, breathing the clean, dusty scent of fresh-sawn lumber. Early light pooled through cleaned windows, catching on hanging tarps and trays of battered tools. Charlie's voice echoed from somewhere inside, cussing out a jammed circular saw, while Matty set out manila envelopes on what was once the timber sorting table, now his planning desk. They made this temporary base for the summer, hammering, painting, wrangling machines and lawyers and electrical permits. The land had revealed itself in fits and starts, old berry canes torn free, a stone wall re-emerging from brush, the slow crawl of wild mint by the well. On this morning, Glenn nearly missed the first car rolling up over the gravel. Not the late-model sedans of realtors or family, but a county pickup, government stenciling still fresh. A woman in a windbreaker, clipboard, work boots, the image of official business, stepped out, face bright with curiosity. Glenn moved to meet her, heart ticking faster. For a moment, he braced himself for another battle, some missed permit, some code violation ready to trip him up. Instead, she stuck out her hand. "Mr. Barrett, I'm Lacey from the County Historical Preservation Board." He tried not to show his nerves. "That's me. What can I do for you?" Her gaze roved over the mill, the battered timbers, the scaffolding and gleam of new roof. "We got wind of your restoration work from the permit office," and her smile tilted from the front page of the News Times. The project caught some attention. Glenn exchanged a quick look with Charlie and Matty, who appeared in the doorway. "Attention good or bad?" She gave a soft laugh, thumbing through her papers. "Potentially very good. There's a program, federal, state matched, for historic industry sites. Old lumber mills like this, not many left with original bones, let alone authentic blueprints." She nodded toward the makeshift drawing table, where Glenn's grandfather's plans were pinned for reference, red pencil notes visible to anyone who squinted close enough. "We're looking for pilot projects to combine sustainable reuse with heritage education. That turbine prototype, for example, could become a flagship renewal piece, if you're interested." Charlie whistled, low and astonished. Matty's eyes were suddenly fierce with hope. Glenn exhaled, years of caution warring with the urge to say yes. He nodded. "I'm interested." Lacey grinned. "I'll get the full application to you. If approved, you could see grant money by fall. We'd need periodic progress checks. Maybe even an open house, someday, showcase what can be saved." The idea sent a ripple under Glenn's skin. He imagined the mill not just functional, but open again to the town, to his family, as more than a cautionary tale or dying relic. Alive. "We'll be ready," he said. Charlie's hand thumped his shoulder. As Lacey climbed back in her truck, Matty shot Glenn a sidelong look. "You realize what just happened, right?" Glenn gave a soft laugh. "Yeah, the world's starting to believe in this place again, too." "Better believe quick," Charlie said. "There's still a lot of rats' nests under those floorboards." Matty just smiled, broad and sure. I'll handle the paperwork, you handle hope, deal. Deal, Glenn felt the word anchor in his chest. A week later, the first checks from the sale of Franklin's seized investments arrived by certified mail. Glenn stared at the numbers, more than enough to make the next phase real. Repairs that once seemed impossible, roof trusses, the water line, a true generator hookup, began ordering themselves in columns of possibility. He called his mother, voice trembling. "They came, Mom, the funds, no more camping rations for us." She broke into tears, then laughter. "Your grandfather would have said, put it in cedar and sweat, not the stock market." "Believe me," he said, "he'll get his wish." The days spun up busier, brighter. Old friends from Newport and as far as Medford called, offering tools, labor, or just stories from the high days of Barrett timber. Each visit layered history, broadening Glenn's sense of the ground beneath his feet. One golden evening in June, he took Charlie and Maddie down to the old pier behind the mill, where the river cut against the root-knuckled bluffs. Charlie tossed pebbles into the slow water. "What's the plan, boss? Turn this into a museum, a mansion, or a wind farm?" Glenn peered up at the rusted wind vanes still bolted to the highest beam. A little of each, maybe a piece that honors what was and builds what could be next. Maddie nudged him. "You've got the law, the money, and half the town's goodwill, and you didn't sell out." He grinned, a kind of astonished pride settling in. Maybe I finally started to believe it was possible. Charlie lit a cigarette, laughter like gravel and honey. "Hell, you even got your own legend, the man who beat Marsh with nothing but doghouse secrets and unpaid parking tickets." They all laughed, the first true, aching laughter in months. The river bore it away, their voices threading through the blue-shadowed dusk. July brought high grass and, true to rumor, a steady trickle of relatives. Glenn kept the mill doors open, sometimes for 6-year-olds chasing barn swallows, sometimes for cousins eager to share a beer and a memory. But one day a car rolled up slowly, uncertainly, a battered silver Civic driven by Franklin's youngest daughter, Jenny. She stepped out, awkward in old jeans, uncertainty plain in her stance. Glenn looked up from the porch, tension prickling his skin. But Jenny didn't have her father's smirk, only a wary hope. "I heard about the court," she said, voice small. "Dad won't talk, she glanced away. "He's not handling it well. Uncle Roy says he's blaming everyone but himself." Glenn swallowed. "I'm sorry, Jenny. None of this was about hurting you or anyone." She nodded, tears threatening. "I know, Dad, he let his own history eat him. He forgot we all have to live here after." They stood there, awkward and silent, the sound of distant hammering drifting over them. After a moment, Jenny produced a faded envelope. "I found this boxed with old family photos. It's for you. I think Grandpa meant you to have it. Maybe he knew you'd be the one to fix what he couldn't." Glenn took the envelope, hands shaking. He opened it, finding a yellowed photograph, his grandfather arm around a young Franklin in front of an unfinished section of mill, the logo freshly painted behind them. In pencil on the back, "To trust and rebuild, first forgive the cracks." He smiled, a tremor of grief and gratitude moving through him. "Thank you," he said. Jenny pressed his hand, her grip warm. "Just don't let history swallow all of us, okay?" "I won't," Glenn promised. She left, shoulders lighter. That evening he sat long in the restored office, the old photograph framed beside a brand new site plan. Out of grief, something gentler was finally growing, not triumph but a kind of peace. Later, in the soft lamplight, Maddie found him at work on a proposal for the historical board. She set a sandwich at his elbow, then perched on the edge of the desk. "What did Jenny say?" she asked. Glenn hesitated before answering, voice steady. "She said, don't let history swallow us. Then she forgave me, I think, for winning." Maddie nodded, silent for a stretch. "It takes more courage to build bridges than to tear down thieves." He offered her half the sandwich. "You're the lawyer, shouldn't I be scared of bridges?" She laughed bright, "Only the ones you burn." In that quiet, Glenn felt something shift, a sense of the past aligning, his grandfather's words hovering in the spaces between restoration and memory. By autumn, the grant came through. It was the county's largest single award for independent heritage reclamation, announced at a ceremony beneath a tent flapping with the wind, the smell of rain in the grass. Glenn stood at the rostrum, the blueprint spread before him, new partners assembled beside. Relatives clustered in the folding chairs, some of them with damp cheeks, most smiling widely. He spoke, voice clear, stronger than he once believed possible. "We lost more than timber here, we lost trust. But you can build that again if you start with what's honest. This place was almost a memory, now it'll be hope." The applause startled him. Matty squeezed his elbow. Charlie, ever gruff, just grinned wide and whistled, drawling, "Live to fight another fiscal year, Barrett." Afterwards, schoolchildren toured the painted sawroom. Teachers snapped pictures of the turbine model taking shape on the rebuilt shop floor. Reporters scribbled, camera shutters clicking. Glenn fielded a dozen eager questions, but he kept looking through the crowd, half expecting his grandfather to stride in from the mist, beaming, stubborn, battered as ever. A young girl slipped her hand into his and asked, "Is it really true your granddad hid treasure for you?" Glenn smiled, remembering the steel box, the key, all those bitter, hopeful nights by the battered shack. "It was never treasure," he told her gently, "just something worth fighting for." Winter returned, as it always did, the storms harder but the house stronger now, beams braced, the roof no longer leaking, the old mill a fixture in county bulletins. The turbines began spinning for test runs, their song singing out across mudflats and orchard alike. Franklin Marsh lingered only as a shadow, a story whispered on the beach, a lesson handed down by parents and teachers. Some said he moved to Idaho, started over. Others said he just disappeared, bitter and broken by his own hand. But whenever Glenn crossed the yard behind the mill, he passed the freshened doghouse, now whole, painted blue, ringed with rosemary. Underneath that roof, through his work, there lingered a thread of legacy and repair. One rainy evening, as Glenn hauled in firewood, Charlie and Matty gathered around the battered kitchen table, now refinished and sturdy. Charlie nudged a bottle of whiskey toward him. "To the future," he toasted. Matty raised her mug, "To forgiveness, even for the old wounds." Glenn met their eyes, these allies, found in storm and desperation, now friends who had helped him build something lasting from the ashes. He drank, the sharp burn settling into warmth. Outside, the wind growled and the tide shifted, but the mill lights glowed on, wild coastal weather buffeting their refuge. Inside, laughter rang. All through that winter, as the storm-battered windows and possibility took root, Glenn found peace in each sunrise. He kept working, days filled with blueprints and pounded nails and shared meals. He taught neighborhood kids how to frame a window, showed seniors around the old turbine models, and set aside quiet hours for old sorrow to finally clear the air. And sometimes, when he closed up at night, he'd pause at the threshold, looking over the land that nearly slipped from his grasp, remembering the lesson his grandfather had left. Forgive yourself enough to try. He did, and that made all the difference. So when, years from then, people asked how Barrett timber survived, how it came roaring back, how it grew energy and purpose from the rot, neighbors remembered a man in a battered jacket, key in hand, who had nothing left to lose but tried anyway. They remembered, too, what he used to say when storms whipped at the roof and hope felt thin as old cedar. Sometimes all you need is grit, company, and a future you're willing to build for yourself. And so, through every tide and turn, the mill stood battered, restored, alive. And Glenn Barrett, unbroken, met every storm with a courage built on the stubborn, shining bones of home.